Hi, how are you? Thank you for joining me. I appreciate it today. So I'm going to get started. My name is Aaron Graben, and like it or not, May 1 rent is coming up, and we're getting a lot of calls, and there's a lot of questions on what we think is going to happen, what we should be doing, what we should be planning. So I'm just going to move this forward here. So this webinar is to try to define what the corporate decisions of the commercial tenants and landlords are going to be as it relates to the rent payments and deferrals for May 1, 2020 and beyond. And beyond is really one of the questions. The COVID-19 financial paradigm, we're seeing it dictate a number of constraints, and it's placing a value on leases that are, you would think the opposite. And we're going to talk a bit about that. And more important, like, we're going to put a lot of emphasis on this on May 1 and how we see that in relation to restarting the restart strategies for our companies. So the rent deferrals will not just be for shutdowns, but also assisting tenants and overcome the massive restart hurdles that are coming up. And I know everyone's like, hey, you're talking about restarting. We're still in the middle of it all, but May 1 is still 2 or 3 weeks away, and things change quickly. And I think it's important that we have a conversation about what restart really means. So we'll be exploring both the good and bad scenarios of that, 45 days or 6 months to 18 months past May 1. I think that's important to talk about. So we're going to go quickly over what happened on April 1. And then we're going to talk about this COVID-19 financial paradigm and what it's doing to everybody and how we're trying to plan around it. We'll talk about the forecasting of the 2 scenarios. So one good, which, what will the new norm look like, and what are the restart hurdles, and 2, the bad. So what that means for landlords and lenders, because I think it's very clear what will be for the tenants. And then we'll talk about government help. And I'm going to be bringing Anthony Clifford in from Titan York. He's going to be talking about what government help that's going to be available to us out there, and conclusions and questions, and we'll go from there. Again, Titan York, we're a tenant rep brokerage. I've been in the tenant-only brokerage. I've been in the business for 20 years, and I use a lot of creativity and sophistication when I represent my clients. And Anthony Clifford, who will be coming up, he's been with me for 12 years, and he had a urban planning background and architectural sort of design firm background. And he's been representing tenants for all these 12 years. And he has a perspective that he'd like to bring forward, and I look forward for him to join us. Okay, so let's talk about April 1. Retail tenants were really the priority, and it was every landlord that had a retail tenant and had an office component basically said, we're not going to talk to the office tenants about deferrals. We're only talking to retail. They're customer facing. They have to shut down. And fitness was one of the most interesting ones, because under the Consumer Protection Act, they had to shut down. Not only did they have to shut down, but they were not allowed to take any monthly fees. So they on March 15th or 16th, they literally stopped all revenue out of wall. Every single one of them, from Good Life Fitness to Orange Theory to your personal trainer that has a small space around the corner, and it was just shut down. And in fact, some of the responses were really interesting. Good Life basically sent an email to every single one of its clients and just said, every one of its landlords, and said, we're not paying you for 6 months. Do what you have to do and deal with that. And of course, the landlord's like, okay, and they have to deal with it. And that shows you the power of covenant. We'll talk about that later on. On the office side, there were very few deferrals. But most paid their April 1 rent without default. If it was B2B, it was so new. We were 2 weeks into it, and most office tenants, I would almost say 90% were able to do that. But May's coming, and now things are going to be, what the forecasts will show us will determine on what we're going to be doing. So I think we're going to be seeing a lot more deferrals on the office side. It won't be full deferrals. There'll be a lot more, they'll be paying portions of rent, I think, and pushing them out. But as it continues on the retail side, there is a definite stop of revenue, and those referrals will continue, those deferrals will continue on in the retail side. But rent deferrals may be required not because of the closures or shutdowns, but instead for restarting. And I'm going to talk a bit about that after we talk about the COVID-19 financial paradigm. So let me first talk about how to value your space. And everybody's different, and everybody's going to have different needs. But there's a perspective that's you have to keep in mind. So one of the most unique aspects about the COVID-19 financial paradigm is that you can't outrun your faltering economy or move your business to another market. So like the virus, every faltering economy is in every community, town, city, province, state, country, and it's frozen. Your business is frozen, and you're frozen literally in that geography that you were in on March 16th. So if you had an office space in downtown Toronto or downtown Dallas, you still have that office space. You can't get rid of it. And even if you wanted to move to a smaller space, there's no landlord or agent to show you space. And the people who are going to approve your deal are working from home at minimal capacity. I can tell you, I have deals on the go where they are going to be closing, but even getting a waiver. So I'm sitting here with a client. I have it, with a tenant. We have a space they want to keep going forward with it. The landlord, who is looking at, hundreds of millions in deferrals, they have a tenant that wants the space, and I can't get a waiver back because everyone is just can't work fast enough to keep up. So one of the questions that you have to ask yourself now is, how much do you value your commercial space? If in the short term, it's the only space you have, how much of an ingredient is it in the successful restart of your business? So the other part of the COVID-19 financial paradigm is that we all need help at the same time. So as we all roughly shut our doors at the same time, depending on how you're capitalized and big or small, we're roughly going to need money around the same time. And will there be enough financial assistance to go around? So right now the government's working on it to make sure that we're flattening the curve of that, how much financial assistance when things go really bad. But what you have in your bank today is all the money you have, and you need to make it last. Your AR, your account receivables, are also subject. I just had one yesterday where we were being mailed a commission check to the Titan York Brokerage, and we got a call from the listing broker saying that we are actually canceling that check because the landlord the tenant has sent a notice to the landlord saying we're not going to be taking that space. So, but inversely, with all our companies restarting at the same time, there won't be enough resources to open the doors, stock the shelves, hire back the employees. That's also part of the challenge. And one of the reasons why deferrals might be more on the table for a restart than where we are right now. So the biggest factor, of course, affecting the COVID-19 financial paradigm is time. So the longer it takes us to fight the virus, the longer companies are paused, and the more runway we're going to need to get out of it. But the longer we're in this lockdown, also the more data we're accumulating, and that's going to lead us to forecasting. So what I want to, so by the end of April, we'll have a much larger COVID-19 data set. And it will be both locally and internationally. And it's going to allow us to better forecast a restart, which at this time, it's currently beyond us. I can't tell you today how long we're going to be in this. But I'm hoping that by the end of this month, that we're going to have a better idea. And there's going to be two scenarios, good and bad. So what I'm going to get into both of them. And of course, good and bad, but what does that mean? And the details are coming. So let's talk about the good side. So let's imagine by the end of April, we are well beyond the COVID-19 apex locally, and let's say Ontario, and there's just lower case acceleration, and we can see with good certainty that we'll probably be back to work within 30 to 45 days. So the end of May, middle of June, something along those lines. But the reason to continue to request the deferrals is not due to the shutdown, but instead of a restart, because we don't really know what back to work is going to look like. So a restart will not be business as usual. And you can think of it in terms of a spectrum. So, will it be like pre-March 16 business as usual or new normal, or will we be back to work with only a certain groups allowed to work, and physical distancing restrictions and mandated area between each person? And once tenants open their doors to customers again, will there be a market? I mean, both locally and internationally, and that has the income to buy our goods. Look, I know that on day one, every hairdresser anywhere is going to be busy. They're going to be, from day one, they won't have an empty chair. I mean, it's starting, but I'm not that bad. So, but that they will be very busy. Others will not be so lucky, and especially if you're really dependent on the U.S. So if we come out of the coronavirus before the U.S., well, what does that mean? We're so dependent on that economy, and I think there's a good chance we will. We have two oceans, the Arctic and a sealed off border, so we're just dealing with the coronavirus in the defined country. Our populations are densely situated in cities, and the distances between towns are quite far as compared to the U.S. So if you can control it, and as again I said, we're frozen geographically, if you can freeze it in that geography, then you have a good chance of controlling it. But in the U.S., it's one big city from Buffalo to Miami, and there's 50 different governors and 50 different rules, and it doesn't sound like the communication is as strong between the municipal and the state and the federal compared to municipal, provincial, and federal. We seem to have there seems to be no daylight between our government and agencies are all working on the same mandate and the same tone. So there's a good chance we'll be out of it before then, but I don't know what that's going to work, what that's going to look like, of course. So tenants are going to have to overcome some massive restart hurdles. So for office tenants, it may be rotating shifts to limit the number of employees in a premises at any given time. And this, I mean, it's counterintuitive right now, but this could lead to a demand for more space. So as there's this move away, a cultural shift from that collaborative open workspace back to individual spaces. So think offices, like individual offices. That might be a demand. So the landlords might be getting phone calls saying, look, I actually need more space. And believe it or not, in the static environment of Toronto, downtown, you would have a very tough time doing that because right now there's very little vacant space. So there's going to be another conversation about, well, maybe I can sublease. So the sublease market might just take off in a different direction. And also rehiring and possibly losing trained employees. Your people have been out of the office for 3 months. Have your competitors picked them up? How did you treat them as you walk them out the door is going to have an impact on how fast they want to come back and how well they're going to work for you. And another thing that nobody's really talking about, except right now in the construction industry, is managing the supply chains. So there's some real challenges. And if you were building out an office space right now, I didn't know this, I just learned this, that most of our lumber comes from mills in the US. Intuitively, I thought Canada, with all of our lumber, but no, most of it comes out of the US, and carpet from Minnesota, and HVAC equipment from China, as well as from the US. So, how fast are we going to be able to, manage those supply chains? And then as we open up, suppliers are going to ask for COD. They're going to say cash on delivery, because they're going to minimize their risk. And the smaller companies, I think basic office supplies, it's not the hardest thing in the world, but think food or restaurants, and the chicken, the meat, the vegetables, parts for assembly, small manufacturers. So there's going to be a requirement for funding of all of these different, these restarts. Oh, this here. So, so that's the good side. let's talk about the bad. And the bad is we get to the end of April and we have no end game in sight. So let's postulate 6 to 18 months. And now what? Well, I think you can expect on a macro level, small businesses will protect its cash flow and stop paying rent. And I'm not an advocate for that. It's just sort of where I see, happening. And it will be irrespective of the landlord's response. But for large companies, it's going to be a different story, because if they lease a lot of space with landlords, the landlords are going to be far more flexible. So there's a saying, like, if I owe you $1,000, I have a problem. If I owe you $1 billion, you have a problem. So I think that muscle flexing is going to be really putting landlords in positions. But the larger companies will also have a better chance to capitalize on the lower interest rate loans and be able to run that COVID-19 financial marathon a lot faster, a lot longer than smaller companies. And from the landlords, they won't have a choice. They will not be kicking out tenants, but working with them to ensure income into the future. Like they're just, no rent in May is still livable. It's not something I'm advocating. I want you to know I'm not advocating not paying rent, but no rent because you can't in September, October, November, December, January, February. So that's going to break a landlord. So, and for landlords, the type of lender they have will make all the difference in the world on mortgage deferrals. And you'll see, so if it's a big bank, they have huge access to excess cash, government, and they can provide those deferrals. But if you have a secondary lender that raises their capital from pension funds and other investors, well, those investors are going to cash and pulling money out of mortgage funds as fast as they can. So they just don't have the same access to capital from the federal government that the bigger banks do. And they're only providing you a deferral if you need it. So I'm going to tell you a story. I have real estate. I own real estate personally, commercial buildings. And I have 3 different lenders. I have Duca, and I'll tell you 2 of them, and I'll leave the last one because the last one gave me the harder time. I don't want to make them feel bad. Duca and TD. And TD sent me an email with a 1-page thing and said, sign this. We understand, like, you have retail tenants. We'll defer your mortgage for, and we have lots of room in our valuations. But we'll defer your mortgage for 6 months. Just sign this and send it back. You're done. And Duca sent me an email and said, look, just reply to the email that you confirm, and we will defer your mortgage. Again, we had lots of value in the building for another 6 months, and that was it. The third one sent me an email saying, we want to see your financials, we want to see your rent roll, we want to see letters from your tenants, we want to see your personal financial position. And that one was focused on because they were one of those secondary lenders there where pension funds and other investors were involved. They can't give it to us. So, and we're still in discussions and we think it's going to happen, but that was an interesting experience on a personal level. I think I missed a slide here, so give me 1 second. So I just want to go back to, landlords' responses. So the landlord's response to deferrals of rents, some of them will accommodate, some won't. But on the retail side, they're going to be more accommodating from that perspective. They're going to be looking to see who's going to need this deferral more. They're going to really delve down into your companies, and they're going to ask for financials, and that's going to be a common thing. So I have a client who requested it, a deferral. The landlord said, please send me your financials, and the client backed off and said, we don't want to send financials. We're not doing a deferral, and left it at that. You're going to see subleasing really happen in the marketplace, and I think that will really kick in when people are back to work, and it'll happen right away. It'll be put on the market as fast as you can. So if you're a tenant that you think you're going to be subleasing, then I would expect that you should be working that out now with your broker or your agent, hopefully Titan York. But you'll also see companies resetting and not planning to hire back the full complements. We know companies that got rid of a number of people, and they're not going to bring them back because this was an opportunity to get rid of them. And then, of course, the whole work from home experience, how is that going to affect people's concept of how much space they want to hold? Can I take 50% of my people and keep them working from home? I only need 50% of the space. And you'll see that kind of subleasing. And then you'll say, like, well, okay, we want to share space subleasing. And that's going to be, I didn't put it on the slide, but share space subleasing is going to be a problem. So you're going to see people that want to have separate space due to their back to work, physical distancing. So I don't want to share space with another company. I don't have control of those tenants. And I was talking with a designer, and if anybody wants that information, I'm happy to provide the designer's name. And he had put out there that they could build a wall in 2 months for $48,000, design, permit, constructed, away you go. So if I'm 2,500 square feet, that doesn't make a lot of sense. But if I'm 10,000 square feet, $48,000 is really kind of less than a month of rent. So, then it makes sense to put up a wall and sublease out portions of the space. And if anyone wants more conversations about that, please don't hesitate to call me. I'm more than happy to talk about that sort of sublease positioning. And expansion. So there could be pent-up demand, and they've got to hire big, and you'll see some demand for space. And you'll see also, again, we talked about physical distancing. And we could talk about, and I'm happy to go on more, and I might save for another webinar, about what will happen in Toronto for the downtown west versus the downtown core, and pricing and the gig economy. But I think for May 1, I think we're just trying to focus on our companies and where we're going to be restarting them. So I'm going to move back now. So here we are. It's really bad, or maybe it's going to be okay. And I'm going to put you forward to Anthony Clifford. So he's going to talk about the assistance now from the government and what we should be expecting right now. And I think there's going to be more as time comes. So Mr. Anthony Clifford, Titan York, Vice President, I hand it off to you for a while.
Thanks, Aaron. I appreciate it. Hope everyone is doing well out there. We, as we continue to run our business being Titan York, we're trying to keep up to tabs with as much of the government incentives as possible. And like you guys, I'm sure you're all well tuned in to what the offerings are. However, we do want to recap them. They are very, very fluid. They do change daily, if not hourly. And really, this is the only supplement programs that are available right now. And they all have a lot to do with, or all have to do with wages and benefits for employees, and not so much rent relief. However, it is important that we're all capitalizing on it as much as possible. So just take you through pretty quickly through some of the updates. Encourage you guys, to know that we are not experts on this. I do try to keep up to date as much as possible, but do encourage you to speak with accountants or double check facts against the government websites. However, we have done our best to get the most relevant information together. So the government has been pretty quick to get stuff out. It's chasing that elusive perfect plan. And so obviously there are changes that happen day to day. Really, we're going to talk about the Canadian Emergency Relief Benefit being CERB, Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy, which is going to be the biggest one for businesses, supplemental government loans, as well as addressing summer students, which is a topic that's coming up. Aaron, we're going to flip one. So the first one, Canadian Emergency Relief Benefit, everyone is probably up to date on this. Not a lot of changes, $2,000 a month for employees that are no longer working. So it doesn't apply to part-time workers or if you're doing some side gigs and picking up some money here and there. The criteria is that you are no longer working and you will be applied to CERB. If you had applied to CERB after March 15th, prior to CERB coming out this past Monday, those applications will be automatically switched over to CERB, and those employees will continue to receive those benefits. So not a whole lot has changed. They are doing applications by birth date. Today is actually the last day of restricted applications, being if you were born in Q4. After this, it will continue to roll out as applications come in. I have heard of people already getting money, and some for 2 months, because it is from March 15th to April 11th, and then April 11th into May. So some have already received $4,000, and that's a good thing. Some of the criticisms for that, however, that it's not enough to cover high living costs for middle-class families, and that's a significant pay cut. And so what the government has said is that they are really pushing out this Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy, which is really going to have a lot of impacts as we move forward, and we'll address that on the next slide. So the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy, the government has said they'll cover up to 75% of wages, up to $147 per week per employee. Really what this will do, and they are encouraging companies to cover the rest of that 25% if possible. And really what this does is it allows companies to either remain functional throughout this period or assist with the ramp up process that Aaron was talking about when it comes time to go back to work. It also helps those employees stay connected to that company, protect them from competitors, and really it puts in more money into their pocket than CERB would, approximately $1,500 more on a monthly basis. So it's really some benefits there. It will be backdated to March 15th. Once that application is gone. Now, this program is not in play as of now. It is rolling out in the near future. The expectancy is that the companies, businesses will continue to pay those salaries and then will receive the remuneration from the government at that time. The biggest changes this month were announced on Wednesday. Originally, it was required that you show 30% decrease in revenue from the same period of last year. They did change that for the month of March because, of course, this lockdown really started halfway through the month. So if comparing to last March, you only have to show a decrease of 15%, and then 30% thereafter. A lot of the questions that arose from the public was, this doesn't really address companies that are either startups or fast-growing companies. To show losses from last year might not be possible if either those financials don't exist or your company has been flourishing over the past couple months. So what they've said is some companies can now apply and use January or February of this year as the comparison. And that, again, will really help the startups and fast-growing companies to show it to a closer time frame as opposed to March of last year. Again, those will all be backdated. So these things are changing, again, day to day. Right now, as for my understanding, that is the current status of it. So there was some relief for some of those questions, and I think the government has been pretty receptive to hearing criticisms and trying to adapt, and hopefully that will continue. Next one, Aaron. So another topic that came up, and this hasn't been ironed out completely, is the use of summer students. And this is sort of two-pronged. One is helping summer students acquire income over the summer to pay for their education, but also to help companies hire summer students to help with that ramp up time. And so what the government has said that they're going to do, and again, this is not concrete, is that they will be covering 100% of summer student salaries. And they haven't released what that number is or what the maximum amount would be. However, they are saying that they'll be covering 100% of the salaries, and that will really help with that ramp up time. Companies can staff up with summer students to help with that ramp up and that getting the company going again without a large burden of extra expenses. So I would encourage people to look into those programs. It can be cheap labor for companies, and hopefully will be mutually beneficial for those companies and for summer students. So keep an eye out for that. We will update in future webinars as well. Really the last one that we're going to speak about is government loans. So this is not, I don't think it has been rolled out quite yet, but to my knowledge anyway, is that businesses will be allowed to apply for a $40,000 loan. This $40,000 naturally is not going to be of huge impact for major businesses, but for smaller companies, $40,000 can go some distance. So the idea is that the $40,000 loan will be interest-free until December 2022. The government has also claimed, although not confirmed, that there's a potential for up to $10,000 of that loan to be forgiven, assuming that the remainder, being that $30,000, is paid off by that date of December 2022. So essentially, there could be potential for $10,000 of free money. So for those companies that are that need it, I would suggest you look into those as well. A reminder that loan has to be used towards business costs, so rent, employee wages, inventory. You can't use it personally for other investments. I imagine it'll be hard to track that down, but I would encourage you to abide by those regulations and apply that loan if you are using it to your business directly. So just want to go over a couple quick numbers. Again, these are changing so dramatically, but as of Thursday morning, they said the announcement was that over 6 million applications have been received, with about 4.5 million already processed. And again, people have already started to receive money. The government said 2 to 3 days, and some people have gotten it quicker. So help is on the way. Hopefully that'll help many people. The wage subsidy, that, as we talked about, is really going to help the companies hire, and we've seen that in the past few days with, and I'm going to use 2 airline companies as an example, being Air Canada and WestJet. Air Canada stated yesterday that they're rehiring 17,000 employees, and WestJet 6,500 employees approximately. Of course, there's not going to be enough work for everyone, but it does allow them to continue to receive pay, of which those airline companies, again, are having 75% covered by the government. So, it does help out with that income level being above that CERB dollar value. And hopefully more companies will continue to do so. It's important that we keep people employed. The last point I wanted to bring up, Dr. Theresa Tam this morning, the Chief Public Health Officer, had put a bit of a timeline because the federal government did release their expectancy to a certain degree of what's going to be happening with this pandemic. They are expecting this first wave to extend for several more weeks until the end of spring, beginning of summer, and then hopefully start to see a leveling off and dropping at that point. There is expected, of course, second and tertiary waves expected to come into the fall and thereafter. So assuming that this month's numbers, as Aaron has pointed out to, are positive, I think by May, June, we might be able to see some decreasing in numbers and hopefully some restrictions being lifted slightly. Of course, it's important that we don't jump too quickly out of the gate on this thing. Aaron has sort of talked about that rotating employee strategy where there's only some people in the office. We'll see how it all pans out. But the last few days have had some positive numbers. Doesn't mean we're out of the weeds quite yet. However, there is, there is some signs that the physical distancing is working, and if that continues, we should start to see this thing hopefully leveling off by the end of spring, beginning of summer.
That's Anthony. Thank you so much. That was really great.
No problem. I hope, if there are any questions, I'm happy to try and answer them. Again, I'm not an expert, but we are trying to keep up to date as possible. I do encourage you to check out either the government websites or, of course, because things are moving so rapidly, sometimes the daily media is the best. So if you have any questions, I can certainly try to answer them, but do your own due diligence, and certainly speaking to an accountant will be the best chance.
So I guess my final thoughts are, if you plan to be in business, you don't know what it's going to look like at the end of the month, but always starting conversations is a good thing to do. If you start the conversation later, then it takes longer to get answers. So if you think that you're going to be needing help, then go back to your bank, if you think rent is an issue, talk to your landlord about it, come up with a plan. The both of you are partners in staying in business. So there should be a reception to that from the landlord side. And I'm going to put this out to questions now. I'd like to hear if there's any go to the Q&A. Okay. So the first the question is, how did where did you come up with 6 weeks from from May? And I'm throwing a dart. In many ways, we all are. We know that there's an end to this at some point. It can't continue on in the same way. We know that it will come back again in time. We've been told that. But there will be a point where we have to leave our homes and we have to go back to work and we have to do those kind of things. I have a question for Anthony. So, if you were going to think about what's coming up, where do you think the government help is going to be in 6 weeks from now? Like, where can you postulate any new programs that could help?
I'm not sure what new programs they can put into play. I think the big question is if this thing gets extended beyond 6 weeks. I mean, when they talk about CERB, it's based on a 4-month basis. So you can continue to receive those payments for 4 months. In 6 weeks, like you mentioned, we're going to have a much better idea of a timeline. And the question is, are those benefits going to be extended? And will there be modifications to that? So I think we'll continue to see some easing of the requirements for applications in terms of incorporating more businesses. I think there are many out there. We address the startup and fast growing companies, how they modified that application process. I think we'll probably see some lightening of that. The government, obviously all of us would love to see some help with rent payments or something from the top down in terms of helping that situation. Everything is being based on employee income and wages, which of course is one of your highest costs, equal or just ahead of real estate leasing. So, I think there's been some help from the government in terms of those wages, but it'd be great to see some help in other areas. So I think, things will continue to move forward. And I really believe that if this thing is going to go longer, most of it will be addressing longer term strategies. You mentioned, going into winter or even as far as spring next year. If these restrictions stay in place, there's going to have to be some extension of these benefits. So I think that's where we'll see most of the changes. But again, time will tell.
Yeah, I'm expecting that there'll be some kind of conversation to be had to help out landlords. I think right now the first focus, and I was talking with the CFO of Porter Airlines, and he was saying how they kind of they position themselves correctly for it, and the conversations are like where's the government going to go with helping out industries, and first it was let's help everybody out, let's help the people out, and then it was okay, well let's pick our industries that we're going to help out, and I think they're going to be going down the line, and I'm curious to see where it's going to go for the landlords, because I know it's we're talking tenants, but really they're the sandwich between the lender and the tenant, and one is I'm not getting money from my tenant tenant's not getting money from the consumer in the real estate ecosystem, and I can't pay my mortgage, I can't pay the mortgager. How is that? Who's going to be there to help them? And I think that you might see some real help from the federal government into the banks. And again, I'm curious to know if it's going to help out those lenders that are not banks, but are that do mortgages in a different way through like the pension fund investing. We'll leave it at that. I think it's a great spot to stop. And I want to thank everybody who joined us. And if you have any questions, one about as you get closer to May, what's going to happen. We weren't sure how much commercial real estate brokers were going to be relevant in this market where everybody's working from home, but it turns out we're extremely relevant. Like we spend all day talking on the phone with clients about what's coming up next, what to do about their leasing, and it turns out that you know, we're there for our clients, and our clients have no problem reaching out. So I want to thank you again for joining us. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us directly. Both Anthony and I are here to help you. And at Titan York, have a great day. Thank you.
Yes.
Bye-bye.